Giovanni, welcome, man.
Hey, thanks a lot.
All right. Every time you're on the show, I learn so much about what I should have been doing 10 years ago and what I can do to try to catch up. What's going on in Giovanni's world now?
It's funny because I'd been gone the last couple of weeks. I was at a couple of conferences, and on the way over here, I was actually thinking about kind of asking you what the landscape is with the folks that you talk with out there. But as far as what the big news is, because we've missed a couple of weeks here. There's no way that folks in business, especially if you're worried about marketing and growth and sales like that, aren't aware of what's happening with Facebook and all the social media platforms. And every single day, if you're like me and you're a nerd and you're kind of knee deep in this stuff every single day and you're paying really close attention to the news, you can't escape the fact that all of these platforms now are starting to really kind of tighten up the access that they're giving business to their users. So as a user myself, and I live in this really weird kind of world where I am a huge privacy advocate. I'd mentioned before on the show, I deleted my Facebook account about 5 years ago because as a developer, I saw what they were doing. I saw the access that people were getting. I saw how they were going out and buying third-party data and how effective they were at matching that stuff up. So, to me, it spooked me enough when I saw what the capabilities of that platform were that I got rid of it altogether about 5 years ago because I don't want to play that game with them with my personal data. But at the same time, I live in the world where I'm utilizing that data for my clients, right? So it's an issue of, and I'll back up a little bit and say, the inherent conflict there are what people would be the hypocrisy for me taking that personal stance is everyone's an adult. And if you choose to play in that, if you want their free platform for what they give back to you, because there's a lot of value in using Facebook, right? Yeah. And especially me as a person who lives in the marketing world, not being on Facebook obviously poses some obvious challenges for me, right? Yeah. So from the standpoint of what you could be perceived as being hypocrisy on my part, anybody who's on Facebook gets value out of it, and you're choosing to give up your personal data in it's certainly not a free service, but in exchange for the service they provide, right? Right. So plenty of folks can choose not to do it. I choose not to do it, but I have to utilize it for my clients. So with that being said, businesses that are out there utilizing these platforms, it's going to be monumentally more difficult to get access to your fan base, even your fan base, the consumers and the people that say they want information and they want to get content from you. It's going to be harder and harder for them to find that now through an organic means or an editorial means. So what does that mean for us as businesses? Number one, you have no choice but to start spending money on ads, period. If you want to get access to your users on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, not yet so much on LinkedIn, but it's going to happen on LinkedIn. And it's not because all of these companies are trying to make a money grab. It's because from a liability standpoint, they've got to button up their operations. They cannot just be opening up their APIs and their databases to anybody who wants access to that data. So from a standpoint of what we're looking at as businesses, you can't move forward in an honest way and expect to see success if you're not willing to put a budget aside and start paying for advertising. So that's number one. Number two, as you move into that world and those folks that are already doing advertising, the second, kind of, I guess that was the wound. The salt in the wound is that it's going to become more and more difficult to be able to specifically identify your user base, because even when you pay for ads now, Facebook has got, what they call, they have all these different points of identification that you can go and identify who your prospective consumers are, your prospects are. And a lot of that stuff's going away as well. Facebook is removing a lot of that. So what that means is you're going to have to start advertising again to a broader range of people that are not going to be relevant to what you're selling anymore, because you're not going to be able to go in and say, I want to get access only to MBAs who are CEOs of companies in the Dallas-Fort Worth area within this industry who are, divorced with 2 kids. I mean, the amount of detail, the granularity that you can get whenever you're creating ads right now. I mean, I'm at a point now to where I'm doing targeted advertising on social, and I'm doing it at a cost of, heavens, in some spots less than 20 cents a click, which is outrageously, affordable. You're going to get to a situation where you're going to start seeing a lot of the interactions with your brand not convert, and that's where you're going to see this. You can still bid whatever amount of money you want to bid on an interaction or a click, or if you want to do a cost per thousand, however you go about doing that. Your budgets are within your control. The problem is going to be that those budgets are not going to generate the same amount of conversions. They very well may generate more traffic, but your conversions are going to suffer, and we can talk about those details about how we go about that later on.
All right, with the problems that we're facing with Facebook and the tightening of the screws of all the social media networks that people are using to reach out to advertise to get new clients, to firm up the relationship with current clients, doesn't that leave it open for innovation of a new social media network that isn't playing with all the same problems that the old ones have got?
And that's an interesting point, because part of it is it certainly leaves the door open, and Facebook is already facing the problem or the challenge of the fact that their growth in a younger demographic has stalled out. Okay, now they own WhatsApp, they own Instagram, and Instagram is growing like crazy. The interesting thing about, how Facebook kind of weathers the storm is, how do they handle the very real issue of people's data, and whether, and the funny thing about this is that, 30 years ago, before the internet was ubiquitous in our lives, you could go do a request. I don't know if you could really do this or not, but if you were to go and look at the data file of a marketing firm that did marketing from catalogs and sales, and they collected stuff from your credit reports and things like that, they had, maybe 70% of the same data that Facebook has today. The additional data that Facebook and Google and all these companies have today are behavioral analysis that is live, that is coming directly from us as the source, right?
Yeah, right.
So, there's no question that 30 years ago, if you would have gone and pulled my credit and handed it over to one of these marketing firms that primarily work through, word of mouth marketing and mailing and things like that, they would probably know that I was an overweight, 40, 50-ish, year old white guy, based upon, where I lived. They could assume what my political persuasion was. They could assume whether or not my kids went to public or private school. I mean, they could make some educated guesses and be right enough, right, that they could know whether or not it would be valuable for a company to send me a mailer for a refinance on my home, or maybe a jet ski, or maybe a vacation property or something like that, right? So the issue is, for folks like Facebook, how do they weather the storm? And again, because I pay attention to this stuff, the former owners of WhatsApp, God, I hope I got that right, WhatsApp, one quit about a month ago over data privacy, and the other one announced last week that he was quitting over the way Facebook was handling data privacy. That's not a small issue when the creators of one of the largest SMS platform, messaging platform out there that you own, if their owners have quit within a couple of months of each other, citing the fact that they don't think that you're handling people's data, or the fact that they don't agree with the way you're handling people's data, that is not a small issue. I mean,
No.
and it's certainly internally, that is something that, at some point in time,
Well, here's my thought. I liken this to the deregulation of the phone companies.
Mm-hmm.
Then everybody gets their own private cloud, so they feel protected, and they have their own mini ecosystems all over the place. So we just come up with all these little regional, if you will. That's not really a good term, because it's there's no borders here, but their own private networks that their own mini versions of Facebook, Instagram, Telegraph, all the rest of these things. I'm wondering if that's where we're.
Well, I mean, certainly you have that with some places like with Slack and things like that. And I mean, the challenge that we have, if we're going to flip and move from the consumer role to say an entrepreneur who's going to launch a company like that, right?
Yeah.
The challenge is, number one, you're walking into an industry that is, at this point, especially over the last several months, is probably trusted less than Congress at this point. People are freaked out about the people that pay attention. And so, I think the differentiator you would have if you launched a company like that would be, how do I guarantee to people?
Well, I'm not talking about launching new companies that everybody else joins. I'm talking about you guys have your own little private clubs.
Well, but when you say club, do you mean like social network?
You have your own social network that deals with your demographic, and then the people want to either be in it or they're not, and they can feel secure that you're not going to have, Big Brother isn't going to have access to their data.
But still, somebody has to be the owner or the traffic cop. Somebody has to control that small social network, right?
Right. Like I'm talking about like Marriott or other companies like that have the wherewithal to say, let's join our social network.
Okay. So
you know what I mean?
So the first thing would be is the brand or the company behind that, because I think that you're onto something interesting there.
Yeah.
Do you trust them with your data?
Exactly.
The second part, though, and the thing that's the reason why Facebook is what it is today,
right?
Who's going to join 87 small social networks? See, I mean,
that's true.
And that's the challenge. I mean, you've got
the challenge is linking them.
It's linking them, and then when you link them, how do you link them in a way? I mean, then you've got to start sharing data, right, to make connections. And see, that's the thing is when Facebook ask you to download your address book so they can find your friends.
Right. Yeah.
That's that slippery slope. That's where that starts happening. And the reason why people can't leave Facebook is because that's where all my connections are at. I can go to LinkedIn and I can find my business connections there. I can go to Goodreads and all my book nerd friends are there. I can go to Yelp and all the foodies are at Yelp, right? I can go to Pinterest and all my people that like to design stuff there, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of those networks, if you choose to connect your existing world or they don't. And so the challenge is, what is the individual user's tolerance before they get completely exhausted with having X amount of social media sites? And I can say the sites that I personally communicate or work on a regular basis, Facebook because of business, so I'm managing Facebook pages for clients,
right.
And then actively, honestly, Twitter and YouTube. I got rid of Instagram as soon as Instagram was sold to Facebook, and that breaks my heart because I loved Instagram. So I used an alternative called Visco. But even on Visco, I just don't take the effort to go and log in, and that would be like the third most important social media site that I have in my world. It's already too much. And so, I mean, I spend my time on Twitter and YouTube.
Right.
And then outside that, and if I'm a nerd, right, I am deep in this industry. It's what I live for, right?
Yeah.
And if my tolerance level is 2, and I would take that back. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, right? Yeah. So if my tolerance level is 3, right, these smaller fiefdoms that you would create that to me sound like an interesting idea. Yeah. The speed bump or the hill that you've got to climb then is, how do you convince people that it's worth their time? Because they're not, as far as I know right now, for all the whining and complaining that we're doing, people aren't leaving Facebook yet.
We got to go, but we'll talk more about that later.
Okay.
Thanks.
It always happens to me, Michael.
I know. Giovanni Gallucci, you've been listening to CEO Money with Michael Yorba. Thanks for listening.